All right, we are live. Welcome to another episode of P5Live Sessions. It's nice to start this out with a nice stress test on the compression engine. So hopefully you see all kinds of mangled pixels out there, kind of slurry images, vectors. We're going to get into a new session of P5 Live today. The last 2 weeks, we focused on glitch, exploring what that P5.glitch library could do. Today, we are going to explore modulo. I'm pretty sure I've looked at modulo in the past. Actually, I'm quite certain I have. But it's just one of those things that is super fun to continually explore. So, I'm going to mess with it today. It came up recently teaching creative coding. This comes up all the time of what modulo can do for us. And so I'm just going to mess around with it and do like a frame count modulo width to set something in motion. And we'll see what happens over time. We're going to just keep adding up this modulo and see where we can apply this thing to get all kinds of interesting things to happen. So I'm going to actually make the code a little bit bigger. Make this thing a bit bigger. Maybe throw a modulo into that. Frame count modulo 450 so the thing can get like bigger and then smaller and bigger. And we'll slowly just add modulo all over the place and see what can happen with this thing. Okay. So I'm going to speed things up, go like ×5, get this thing running faster across. I'm also going to enlarge the code a little bit. So this thing is moving across. Let me see if I change this to like a rectangle with some center out rectangularness. Let me translate instead of drawing there. And then I get to play with rotate. So I'm going to do a rotate radians. Frame count modulo 90. And that's kind of interesting. It's like this modulo does this, I would call it like a ramp. It's kind of going up to a number and then dropping down and up to a number and dropping. And normally if I did something like 45 or so, then we would really see this as a harsh contrast that when it like hits that spot. But that's kind of nice too. We can create rhythms. 25. Yeah, that can be something interesting to try and exploit to create some visual rhythm with this thing going. If I use 10, then it'll look kind of nervous. 5 doesn't do enough. 10, maybe it's interesting to do like that ×5. So we get that rhythm plus even more distance on it. That's something I think I'm not doing so often. That's kind of interesting. And by not so often, I mean never. What if it's ×10? Wow, then this thing goes really fast. But what was interesting was just this quick little test. At 90, it makes a perfectly smooth rotation. But I guess that's kind of pointless. I might as well just have frame count if I wanted that. So actually that's not so useful. I take it back. Let's go back and play with this rhythm kind of thing a bit. And try it for the size as well. What if this was also ×15, but then that times a large number? Then we get a kind of splat, splat, splat. When it goes too fast, too big, then we can't see the thing. Yeah, it's looking a little jittery. What if it's that times another number? And turn off the fill for a minute. Say no fill and a stroke that's white. Just to see what these things look like. And we always have to switch between a rect to an ellipse just to see what the differences are. Yeah, that's something really cool about modulo, is like getting free shapes out of a single shape. Maybe that's something to also exploit and mess around with, is if I had just an ellipse that was 0, 0, 150, and turn this one off, we just have this single ellipse running across the page. I'll make it bigger so we can see it bigger. And we just have a single shape, but if we use modulo and move things fast enough or change the scale fast enough, we can, with this kind of after image, it can suddenly become like a bunch of shapes. So I'm going to say like frame count modulo 350, which does this zooming thing. But if I make that grow by a fast speed 10 times, then we get some orby things. We could go times 30, 40, 50, and now we're already in that territory where we're getting multiple shapes. Ooh, and you start to get these kinds of artifacts where it's like when you're watching a car driving by going the right speed, the wheels start to go backwards there. We can hit these. This almost looks like it's strobe moving slow. I can make the overall shape bigger, but then that actually changes our whole timing, so maybe that doesn't work. Nevertheless, let's play with responsive sizing. So I'll make this a 3/4 of the height and then find out what the right numbers are to have some of these patterns appear. Ooh, that was an interesting one right there, 40. It needs to be either a little bit more or a little bit less to slow it down. There, I don't know if you can see this on the stream, but it gets an interesting kind of shrinking while growing at the same time. Let's try going larger and larger numbers, 70, 80. Ooh, there, that's kind of a stable static. Let me try 90, 200, and then it's fun to go nuts and throw like crazy numbers at it, which maybe don't make a difference at a certain point because the numbers might just kind of loop around. But actually, that's not true. The numbers end up going so fast through it that you really get to see multiple copies of things. Something I should quickly try is using similar ratios like what I have here. What happens if there? So now it's like the frame count is being multiplied by the same size as this limiter. Yeah, what is modulo? Something interesting to look up. I sometimes think of it as a limiter. You say, I have a growing crazy number, and it should be limited by the number that's on this side. So there's all kinds of instances to use it to find even numbers or every third, fourth. But now I can play with like a weird ratio. And this is kind of nice. I'm getting 3 copies of this circle with a single ellipse just because it's going, it's like pulsing from small to big at such a crazy fast rate. That's the slow rate. Okay, but let's keep playing with those numbers. Times 1 does not work. 0.25, that works. 7.5, maybe there's no difference with or without the 1. It seems to not make a difference. And if I say times 0.99, okay. 9.8, 0.6, 0.5 is stable, 5.1. Aha, that's nice. Then it's like dual growing. The same thing but faster. That's stable. And then 0.1 or even 0.1 Must make it like slowly grow. And that's interesting. We can get this kind of bullseye out of a single ellipse. Okay, another thing I'm going to try out is just moving a shape super fast. So let me say ellipse 0, 0, height times 0.75. There we have just a single shape moving across. Oh, I need to get back in the habit of saving these things and taking a snapshot of the code and image every once in a while. So this is a P5Live session. What are we calling this? Modulo. Hopefully, yep, it's not taken. Okay, nice. I'll clone it once in a while. Tan is fun too. I'll have to explore that. Might have to have a whole session on tan or see if it blends well with the modulo. We'll give it a try. Yeah, so here this thing is moving 5 across, or it can move the frame count across way slower or faster, and this is where it's fun to do that same, just tweaking that number, going faster and faster and faster until this thing starts to hit those speeds where it starts to go backwards or give us this duplicating effect. Times 100. Yeah, we start to get this like walking backwards movement. 120 seems to be really stable, probably because it fits perfectly into the width of the screen. That's also very stable, and I could make this a smaller number and we could see those circles sitting there, and then go like one more than that, and these things will slowly walk onward. Let me turn off no fill, or just actually override it with a fill with some opacity. Or with solid, and then we can see what this looks like as the background increases. We can start to get some interesting like flashing movement, of which I could play with the speed and make that thing move faster. There, it starts to go backwards. Interesting illusion. 91. 200, 300, 400. There, now these things are split even more apart. Interesting. Yeah, it's such a nice way to get to be practically playing with loops, but still only be drawing a single thing. I turn off that translate and it's just a single shape up there. But then of course you could have multiple of them and have them hang out like offset from each other. Let me send it even faster. Check out the other space this thing could hold. 1,000. $1,300 is a nice rate. Maybe like 1280. Whoops, way big number. Okay, 1280 is perfectly stable. 1285, 1290. Okay, 1290. Yeah, just to get some motion happening, and then turn on this other motion where the things were like big and small. Ooh, that's maybe too big. 2.5. Take away the background for a minute. It builds up because the stroke would need to be another color. Maybe do the opposite. With no background. There are just those shapes moving by. It's probably interesting to have a whole bunch of these shapes at different modulos, maybe just to see, this is the one that's kind of making little blips. I turn that on again without a background. Kind of looks like noise. And I've also only been playing with the frame, the exposition of these things. I should also try it out here. Frame, count, modulo, height. So then it's like slowly walking down the page. And then play with modifiers to that number. $15, $25, $50, $100, $200. Okay, something between 300 and 400 could be an interesting domain there. It sort of gives us these appearing out of, then they're going straight across. But they're spread out, so I'm getting this kind of free loop out of them. Can get scatter vision. Yeah, and there it's like a 2x3 grid. Now, and actually our numbers are super similar if they were the same, but the height and width are different. And have the size change again. I think I need to make sure my code snapshot is on, so I get a copy of this code every once in a while. And what if the fill had some opacity to it? These things would build up and look extra complicated. If I change the fill to be a light white or opaque, translucent, clear it once. Maybe more background. More opacity, rather. There is no background. Getting into jellyfish territory. They're moving a bit fast. Okay, I'm going to try a quick loop of things. So it's like this is how I'm getting free loops, these seemingly loops by using modulo, and let's test out actually looping with modulo and have things run at different speeds. And let's do just a little for loop. And let's make something called loop count be 50 so that I can know and control how many things I have. So I'm going to distribute these things vertically. And their X is going to be my mouse X for now. We lost our image. I bring it back while I'm typing. Translate X, Y, and let's draw an ellipse at that spot that's like 50. There we go. Okay, so there was all this other stuff happening. We got to turn off this rotation. Translate is still on. And that's essentially what I'm drawing now with my loop. And let's not use the mouse, but let's say, or it could be interesting to say frame count modulo. So it's like wherever my mouse is up to it, it goes to that point. And then let's use I in there. I times 5 plus times 15. So some of them are faster than other ones, but maybe it needs to be way more. Yeah, and they simply have, they're all going the exact same speed, so maybe also have to mess with their values here. So it's not just frame count times 1, but like 5 is faster, 15 is faster. If it was I, then we might start to get some interesting patterns. Let me change this from, that's interesting using the mouse where I can control what the scan rate is like, but let's just use the width. And we have 1, stuck 1, because that guy's 0. So I could start counting by 1, would be the simplest way. Or I still count by 0 and I use some fancy number here. Like 5 plus I times 5. And let me tweak this fill. So now there's no fill, maybe the opposite. Maybe there is. Let's go back to there being a fill. Make these things way smaller. Play with how much background we have for how much of a trace this thing leaves. Now we're getting, yeah, kind of particle vision. But I was also curious just to have these things move just a little bit faster than each other. So I'm going to turn this off for a sec and say frame count modulo width to get them moving at the exact same speed again. And I kind of just wanted to give some a head start. So I'm going to try that one more time. I think, what do I need to do? Can I just say I times 5 plus, yeah, but then if I say times width, nope, I think I have to surround the whole thing. I think this whole thing has to be surrounded. Yep. So this might not even be necessary here. Okay, but that's interesting. Now getting this kind of distribution across them just by giving some a head start. They're kind of 350 ahead of each other. Or 0.35, nope, 35. Yeah, we can build different formations. And then it's nice to have the background on, off. If the stroke is black, then I can leave a trace. We could also play with a very similar setup for a size. Letting them get up to like 150, let's say. And I'm going to activate a background again so we don't get this overlap. Cool, and then we get this kind of expanding and bursting with a bit of fade or a lot of fade. It's nice having just a little bit of an afterglow to what they're doing. Have to try out stroke white and turn off the fill, see what that's like. And maybe they should be allowed to almost break into each other's spaces. So how big do they get? They should get maybe, I'll just say 250 is too big. Maybe it's something based on this other, they're like just barely not reaching. No, that's not true. And that's also interesting seeing them so small. So maybe it's nice to make a number in the back here that lets them change their size every so often. like this. This is this kind of small ripple and then times 50. Whoa. Chaos. Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, this was actually something, I think it was a couple episodes ago, like 3 or 4 episodes ago. I was hoping to have the shape do something like that. It's going a little fast, but it's a really nice ripple it leaves, and I think this can slow it down too much. There we go. But they're all quasi-connected in shape, so maybe this number should also be changing so they're not so synchronized. Although this all has to do with this head start. How much head start do they get? Aha, interesting. Right now I can make bubble wrap. Psh. So this is how fast they do this motion. Quite a bit slower, yeah, but they definitely need some interesting offset here. So playing with these different numbers are like super in sync with each other. Should get them more out of sync. Doesn't seem to be doing anything. Maybe, there we go. This number cannot be an even set of 100, probably because I'm counting to 50. So 50 goes perfectly into 100. That must be what's happening. So if I do something like, what if I do 51? Then they're all just a little bit off of each other. If I do 50, interesting, then we get kind of every other. 151. Yeah, it starts to look a little bit like spores. I think I want to leave even more of a trace behind. It has kind of everything's drifting off to the right. So I think I also want to slow down this movement so they're not so far apart. Maybe 0.1 here as well. And then they'll pretty much be center out, but slowly walking to the right. Although they don't need to be walking to the right. Maybe it's enough to temporarily take away frame count. And then they're stuck where they are. It's really like a grid. Or is it nice that they're like a little bit alive and just like barely walking to the right? Might be nicer. Yeah, this makes me want to see these things in 3D coming at us. Even though we lose a lot of the fine qualities, especially this fading. But maybe we just switch to a layer and draw in 3D and then trace what we're seeing so that we can get some perspective on these things. Can also quickly play with some color in there just to test it out. I'm going to do color mode HSB, which kills all of that. 100. Actually, what I can also do, oh no, that's okay. Except this is not okay. I think I have to say comma 0, comma 0. No, that's the same. Why did that change? Okay, maybe just the opacity amount changes when you're in, true, because it's out of 100, not 255. I could use 255, but I just have to tweak the number here. Okay. So now I could do a fill that has, let's play with 0. How much saturation? 0. How much brightness? Frame count modulo 100, and everything should like fade in and then go out. And then you introduce I in there with, just to be safe, parentheses. And we're tweaking the fill, but maybe this should all be about the stroke instead. So it's really just that thing gets this, and it could actually be a little bit faster to leave a little bit more line trail. The faster this thing goes, the more defined these ringlets are. But it actually doesn't have to go so fast. That is interesting, but this could go slower and this could go faster. There we go. So yeah, we can get defined ringlets. That's it. This is like now going into moire territory. Especially if I let this thing get really big. It might be nice to test out really big, but really slow here. Nice, and now in 2D territory, we're getting this, like, really looks like the Z-axis fighting of 3D. Interesting. Looks like 3D shapes, but they are not. Okay, but let's go back, turn this whole thing down. Actually, there's so many numbers to play with. That's what's super fun with plugging in a few of these things, getting things like modulo in place, and then it's hard to move onward with the code because there's just so many different numbers to test out and see what's behind that door. We never got color. That was a talk of happening. If I say 50, 50, we can be introducing some color here. I could say frame count modulo 50. Slow things down times 0.2 or 4. These things are still popping, I would say, pretty fast. Slow that down even more. But then it starts to look like this other form. Yeah, who knows what the compression is like out there. I'm guessing it's kind of crunchy. I should probably have a look. We'll see. Maybe it has a nice blending between the forms. To let those things get large again. Yep, there's chaos mode and lesser chaos mode. Yeah, really interesting seeing these different possibilities. Just changing those 3 numbers into different spots. I'm going to quickly change this back to fill. See what that is like, and add a no stroke. So we just get those colors adding up. That's also quite nice and different than the other. If we turn off background entirely, they just get to cover each other up. Yeah, this is a totally different sketch than the other one, so I'm going to quickly turn this one off. Go back to stroke. And I want to keep a copy. I want to separate these things. So I'll clone it, quickly rename it, call this one fill, and then change it. Because I think it could be interesting to, I should probably slow it down a little bit. There we go. Now put these things back into motion and get them running across the page, because they've got this nice kind of button expansion quality. So let's get these things moving instead of this speed. Increase that a little bit so they start walking across the page. We'll see what happens when they start moving fast across the page. Start leaving traces, then they're going to start giving us this like 3D quality as they leave more and more trace. We have some 3D water droplets maybe. I'm going to push it to some crazy number and see what happens when they are really moving left to right. Yeah, we can see some of them going upstream. It's like you hit these certain numbers where you really get the defined shapes, and then you go far enough and they start to break into their own territory of animation. Like this almost zoetrope-like, zoetrope-like animation. There we go. Somewhere out there is the right number where we get all sorts of morphing animation happening. Looks like a 3-frame animation. Not sitting for very long on one of these because there's just so many numbers to test out and see what they could do. Maybe at that speed, let something else either go faster or slower. 83 was pretty good. 73. Yeah, I think it has to be over 60 something in order to get this kind of strobing quality. And if I go into a perfect 100, which would be a multiple of the screen. There we go. That's kind of doing it. Let's quickly test different number of shapes. If we only have 30 or 10. $30 is a kind of nice number. We can see this animation moving upward. Quickly kill the size of these things. Oh no, that's about the fill and the brightness and saturation actually. So if we want to go really bright, we can get a lot of color in there. And our S here was controlling the size. Quickly test out making these things much smaller. Yeah, that already makes quite a difference. Now it's becoming much more pattern-like. Martini olive-esque. Snakeskin-esque. Yeah, with large numbers here, it just totally fills the page. Yeah, we lose what's happening there. Interesting to have these small shapes. There we have both. Let's fade in a little bit of background. Goodbye. And leave some traces. The height positioning is super fixed because they're being distributed here. Let's see. What would we change? That's interesting. Medium between the two. Okay, I walked away from this sort of ringlets. That was kind of nice. Wanted to check out color. Interesting to see what that could do. I'm a fan of what was happening here. I'm going to turn off that stroke. Maybe make these things smaller. And keep exploiting what's possible in this domain. Yeah, if those numbers are like so. So I'm going to duplicate this. And I'm going to call this one 3D because we're going to explore WebGL territory, which will screw up all the numbers. But I'm really curious what these things look like lifting off into space. So I'm going to quickly clean up everything that's not needed on this one. Code purge. And I'm pretty sure that I want to work on a layer so I can still play with some fade. So I'm going to make a layer. This layer is going to be the whole width and height and use WebGL. I don't think I care so much about the... No, I'll leave the color mode active, but then it should be on the layer. And now I need to start drawing my stuff on the layer instead. So layer has no fill, stroke, rect mode. We can switch back to rectangles in a minute. Drawing everything on the layer, and then I have to do layer dot reset because I'm doing some transformations, and probably layer dot clear. And now let's decide to use those or not. Let's show the layer image layer. I'm going to say center of the page, and then turn on image mode center. Image mode center. Yep, so the whole coordinate system is off actually. So before I do that, let me go 0, 0. Turn off this centering there. I can see everything is off a bit because 3D changes your whole coordinate system. So now this needs to go from minus height divided by 2 to height divided by 2. And this needs to be this whole thing minus width divided by 2. There we go. Okay. Recentered. Can reactivate image mode. Can draw in the center of the page. Now we are in 3D territory. Why was that worth it? Because now we can do things like layer dot orbit. No, you can't do orbit control necessarily on a layer. I don't think that's a thing. We can do layer dot rotate Y radians frame count and see those things spin in 3D space. So that's them leaving a bit of a trace temporarily without a background. Ooh, we get all kinds of nice moires. Probably a little too fine to see. Turn the background back on and turn that rotation off for a sec. Let's do layer. Rotate the X minus like 25 degrees. Positive 25 degrees. There we go. 30, 40. And now let's lift these things off into space a bit. Maybe this S is actually like a Z index. There we go. Now we get kind of speaker cones floating in space. But they actually have some depth. So if I go back to this rotation, which might be better to do after the X rotation. No, it's not. No, I want a Z rotation actually. Whoa, trippy. If I take this away, strange, something just changed with the screen. I think it's still going and streaming. Yeah, so now this thing is spinning in a clockwise motion with a little bit of fade. Let's play with how much we're seeing this thing. Mouse Y. Can look like some kind of pyramids out there. So they were under the things, or they're flipped over. Or we can spin it like so, and they're coming upward, and we can see their depth. Yeah, but they're all based on this exact same level, which isn't so convincing. Maybe they should each start out with a unique drop. So I'm not using random at all. This is all about modulo. So I could use a random seed, and that way I can throw them to like a random value before I start to play with that value. I'm going to burn one random because that's a weird bug that's out there. I'm going to say, what am I going to do? I'm going to burn that random by saying let burn random equals random 1. It's really strange. With random seed, somehow the very first random doesn't really work. And then I'm going to say you are all this value. You're actually a random minus 100 to 100. Whoops, this has to be on the layer. Layer.random seed, I guess. Is that right? That doesn't make any sense. Okay, I didn't give a number. We need a random seed. There we go. And now I could use mouse X again, and I can see that they are all at different starting points in doing this modulo. We can let them build up these cones for a while. Now it's like building some kind of fancy landscape. Can do a compile whenever, changing the rotation a little bit. Sideways. Maybe get this underneath view. Totally underneath. Looks like the previous view, but now we get some WebGL artifacts in there, which are quite cool and maybe need to justify pushing the circles even more and further to get more of those artifacts appearing. Whoops. Yeah, not so nice without any background. Let's temporarily just clear all the background and see what this is like. So we've got like raindrops happening. And I'm going to disable that again and put it back on 45. I guess it's always nice having some fade. And if I go 0, okay. Maybe to play with these artifacts, I should try a couple things. I'm going to clone this once and say this is all about artifacts. And I could try things like crunching the layer. I could say layer dot pixel density is 1.4. Then we get these, we're lowering the resolution, and I could say layer dot no smooth. And then I get nice hard low res pixels. And there I'm getting some interesting kind of zebra patterns. Ooh, that's interesting. It's still smooth. Maybe I have to tell the outer layer to also have a no smooth, or like the actual canvas. There we go. Yeah. Weeks and weeks and weeks ago, we had a lo-fi session. Should be repeated. Because it's just interesting seeing what happens when you play with really sharp pixels at low resolutions. Yeah, so those are actually, they're being made soft on the outer layer. This is really having no smooth all over the place. Let those things spin a bit. Yeah, so they're making that shape. Let them get bigger. S is based on this value here. So I can just let that thing get bigger and bigger. Or it keeps the same rhythm and gets way bigger. Maybe a mixture of the two. 30-30, and then I can slow it down so it's drawing it way slower. Too slow, because now we just have like low res grayscaling happening. So it has to go a certain speed. Ah, yeah, and we had turned this down before to like 30. Let's just have 10 of these things. Interesting, kind of ripping across. If there's 5 of them. Yeah, they leave some really nice moire. I don't even know if that's really a moire. It's just kind of like WebGL zebra. What else should I tweak? This density. Yeah, it's a question what the right density is. 1.4. Depends how thin or thick these strokes are. So I'm also going to play with making the layer dot stroke weight super small, so that it's not allowed to like white out the screen, and we get those artifacts there, which probably get crunched in compression. I have a pretty nice line quality here. Test out letting them get huge. And versus like how slow they should move. Okay, there they leave a pretty nice trace behind, so now the background could be dropped even lower to leave more of that trace. I'll start it over once. And maybe let there be a little bit of rotation on its own. Let's go back to a fixed perspective. Yeah, it's somehow animating what could be 3D objects, just a circle. Let their speed go a little bit faster. And mess with their offset to one another. Whoops. And this was when they could spin around with a Z axis. We get kind of a twisting happening. Or on the Y. Yeah, this becomes very swooshy, Casper ghosty. I think it loses some of the form I had. I mentioned quickly we're going to test out changing back to rectangles. What do they look like as rectangles instead of ellipses? If we tweak the perspective, we can definitely make some pyramids. Opening up different portals. Yeah, at the edge of playing with dither graphics here. Okay, I'm going to go back to ellipses. And these were all about the stroke. Fill probably not making so much sense now. Let's stay with stroke. Yeah, we have like 5 minutes left. Should make something else happen to these things. Maybe we throw a tan in there and see what happens. Whoop, 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 whoop. Became hourglassy. It probably needs the math to slow way down if we use a tan in there. It was interesting to test out. It's going to get gigantic. If I set that on a tan and slow everything way down. Whoop. Maybe I leave that where it was and slow this thing way, way down. Okay, now I have this zooming in and out. Instead of it just going in one direction like that ramp, it's ramping down and then ramping back up. Spinning things sideways. Creates a quick perspective. Now we have slinkies in outer space. And I quickly test out removing that tan and giving it back its speed. Yeah, it gives it a nice, with the tan on and off, gives it this nice zooming in, zooming out, rather than getting big and collapsing. So I'm going to put it back. Let there be this tan. Maybe something should be even slower as well. Play with just how much trace there is, letting those things leave a little bit longer trail. And then what happens if we totally play with the z-axis? How close or far are we from this thing? Layer.translate 0, 0. Mouse X will let us go into the thing. So I'm super inside of it right now. But I like to map that value to go like minus width to width. So that way I could pull way back from this thing and see what it's like from afar. And then zoom way into it and let the thing spin around us. Let's let maybe when we draw our actual shapes, we could do a rotation on them. Layer.rotate X radians frame count divided by 4. So these things also have a bit of rotation on them. Yeah, testing with and without a tan in there. They're all very similar to each other right now in terms of their size. Maybe the numbers were just too close. Lift the stroke weight for a minute, see what it's like if these things leave big traces. Without spinning around. Crunched. Low poly. Yep, we'll leave it here with the low poly orbs in 3D space rotating around. that's it for this week. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next week for another session of P5Live Sessions. Thanks for tuning in.